When you seek man's opinion, you get what he thinks. When you seek the Most High, you get the answer he gave. Deuteronomy 28, verse 45 through 46. The curses are for a sign that you may know who you are, upon thy seed forever. Yah did not say DNA test, so I would follow the curses. Yah bless. So this is the comment that the gentleman left, basically saying that the curses in Deuteronomy 28 are more reliable than a DNA test to find his lineage of being an Israelite descendant. And so understand that he has the right to think this, and I expect him to think this way, coming from the background that he comes from. But what I want to do is I want to go over some of the parts of Deuteronomy 28, and what I want to do is show you why this is an unreliable and a largely inaccurate way to determine your ancestry, right? So if you're someone that is from a similar background and of similar thinking, and you want to stay firm in your beliefs, understand, then this is the time right now that you should probably skip this video, because it's going to plant some seeds in your mind, right? So I want to put that out right now. So let's go to Deuteronomy 28 in the King James Version, and let's go to the parts that people use as a replacement for a DNA test to show who the Israelites are today. And so by doing so, we're going to start at verse 15, and then we're going to go all the way up. So let's start at verse 15 right here. It says, "But it shall come to pass, if thou wilt not hearken unto the voice of the Lord thy God, to observe to do all his commandments and his statutes, which I command thee this day, that all these curses shall come upon thee and overtake thee." Right? And so this is someone that's writing through the character Moses and telling the Israelites that if they do not follow all the laws that have been established for them, then there's a list of curses that are going to come upon them and overtake them. And so the idea is that the Israelites never followed all of the law, right? And therefore that if this God is real and the Bible is true, then the curses that we're about to go over should be upon the descendants of the Israelites right now, right this very moment. They should be on these people. And so let's read and let's see if this is the case, and if all these curses that are listed can be applied to fit any group and used to replace an actual DNA test, right? And so as we read each curse, we're going to place them in one of four categories and mark them and put them in a place where they would be designated, right? And so the categories are going to be Black American, multiple people, no one, and other, right? We're going to find out where these curses should be placed in. Can they fit into the Black American category? Can they be applied to multiple people? Are they applied to no one? Or is this a other category, right? So let's continue going into verse 16, which says, "Cursed shall thou be in the city, and cursed shall thou be in the field." And so there's a whole lot of people that are cursed in the city and cursed in the field from all over the world. And we already know that there's a lot of people who call themselves black people that fit this for sure. But once you expand your consciousness past the little world of being a black person, then you'll find out that there are other people who are in other places who are in the pit too, right? Some people in Romania who are cursed in the city and cursed in the field, right? There's people in Bulgaria who are cursed in the city and cursed in the field, right? There's people in Slovakia who are cursed in the city and they're cursed in the field, right? There's people who are throughout India who are cursed in the city and who are also cursed in the field, right? There's people in Pakistan that are cursed in the city and they're also cursed in the field. There's people in the Philippines that are cursed in the city and who are cursed in the field, right? And there's many, many more people throughout the world that are cursed in the city and who are also cursed in the field, right? And so this verse, it could be applied to multiple people today. Let's continue. Verse 17, "Cursed shall be thy basket and be thy store." Now, however you want to interpret this verse, this could also apply to multiple people throughout the world who could see this and say, my basket is cursed and my store is cursed. Multiple people. Verse 18, "Cursed shall be the fruit of thy body and the fruit of thy land, the increase of thy kind and the flocks of thy sheep." Now, only part of this verse is even relevant because most black people don't even own sheep or cattle, right? Not owning sheep and cattle today, this is not a curse because that's not the society that most people live in within the Western world, right? But it was important to these writers because that was the world that they knew as herders, right? So sheep and cattle, if you didn't have those back then, somehow that can be considered a curse. But today, this is only relevant to a significant degree only to farmers in the Western world, right? Who actually use sheep and cattle for their business and their job and their employment, right? So I would categorize this in the other category, right? Let's move on to verse 19. Cursed shall thou be when thou comest in, and cursed shall thou be when thou goest out. Now, this could apply to multiple people depending on how you interpret this verse, right? Cursed when you come into the land because of all the poverty and all the crime, and cursed when you go out because you don't fit in and people are looking down upon you, right? Because of where you come from. However you want to interpret this verse, there's multiple people who can apply it to themselves because of how vague and how broad and how general this verse is, right? Let's move on to verse 20. The Lord shall send upon thee cursing, vexation, and rebuke in all that thou settest thine hand unto for to do, until thou be destroyed, and until thou perish quickly, because of the wickedness of thy doings, whereby thou hast forsaken me. Again, another general verse that could be interpreted to mean many different things and applied to multiple people, right? And so India, this is a country that's having a very hard time economically and has many people who are destroyed and perishing quickly.
The most crucial thing for Indians to understand is that if you look country-wise data, India has the largest number of poor population anywhere in the world. The second perhaps is Nigeria, but we are much above the Nigerian standards also in terms of absolute number of people living under extreme poverty.
You see that? So let's keep going. Verse 21. The Lord shall make the pestilence cleave unto thee, until he have consumed thee from off the land, whether thou goest to possess it. The black Americans have possessed a lot of land in America, and I have yet to see or read about any pestilence or disease consuming them off the land today, right? But a case could be made for this happening in the past with the Europeans in the 1300s, where the epidemic called the Black Plague wiped out upwards of 50% of that population, right? And this also happened with the Native Americans, where the European colonizers introduced smallpox disease, which killed upwards of 90% of their population, right? And the latest disease epidemic that we had was COVID, which did not consume black people off of the land that they possess, right? They're still over there in Chicago. They're still in Detroit. They're still in Memphis, Atlanta, Baltimore, New Orleans, Birmingham, right? And they still possess the land, right? And I don't see this applying to black Americans today, or really anyone in the world, with maybe some few exceptions. So I would categorize this as applying to no one, right? So let's keep going. Verse 22. The Lord shall smite thee with a consumption, and with a fever, and with an inflammation, and with an extreme burning, and with the sword, and with blasting, and with mildew, and they shall pursue thee until thou perish. Another vague verse. This thing could apply to anything, right? I don't know who's being smitten with mildew and who's being smitten with a blasting, right? Maybe that's somewhere over there in Palestine somewhere, or in Iraq. But I don't know who's being smitten with the blasting today. I can't see this be applying to any black Americans today, right? A fever and an inflammation, you can make a case for that with cancer or heart disease. But that also applies to white Americans, Asian Americans, and Hispanic Americans at a similar rate too, right? Those are the top two causes of death for just about any American in the States, right? An extreme burning, right? These are all symptoms that can be applied to these types of diseases, right? So this is another vague and general thing that's not exclusively related to like black Americans or any descendants of slaves, right? So this is another thing that's multiple people, right? I would categorize it there. Verse 23. And thy heaven that is over thy head shall be brass, and the earth that is under thee shall be iron, right? This is a super vague and general verse that this could literally be interpreted to mean 100 different things, right? If we're going to just be honest about it. This could mean all types of things, right? So I'm going to take this and put this in the other category, right? It's not exclusively for black people. I can say you're the only one with heaven over your head that's made of brass, and you're the only one with earth that's under you that's iron, right? This is in the other category. Let's keep going to verse 24. The Lord shall make the rain of thy land powder and dust. From heaven it shall come down upon thee, until thou be destroyed. I can't see how this would apply to anyone in the world, let alone black Americans, right? I go to black neighborhoods multiple times per month. And I've been there where it's raining a lot. And I have yet to see any rain in the form of powder and dust, right? I see regular rain just like I see in other communities. So to make this fit as a curse for black Americans today, you'd have to do a lot of verbal gymnastics to turn this into something else, right? I've heard a lot of people take this verse and make it mean that airplanes are flying over the communities or the fields and spraying pesticides, right? Wild stuff like this that people writing these verses would have not had the slightest clue about at all during the time that they're writing this, right? So no rain is falling down in the black neighborhoods in the form of powder and dust. And neither is this happening anywhere else to my knowledge in the world. So I'm going to categorize this as the no one category. Moving on to verse 25. The Lord shall cause thee to be smitten before thine enemies. Thou shalt go out one way against them and flee 7 ways before them. And thou shalt be removed into all the kingdoms of the earth. There's no group of people who have been removed into all the kingdoms of the earth. Understand, the West African slaves were removed into the Western Hemisphere, right? With roughly 95% of them being shipped to South America and also the Caribbean islands, right? And less than 4% of them being shipped to the United States of America, and Europe having even less than a smaller percentage than that, right? And so this was not all of the kingdoms of the earth, right? It wasn't even half of the kingdoms of the earth, right? So this verse here cannot accurately be applied to anyone, right? So this is going into the no one category. Let's keep going. Verse 26. And thy carcass shall be meat unto the fowls of the air, and unto the beasts of the earth, and no man shall fray them away. And so this is not happening to anyone, especially not black Americans, right? When they die, they get buried in their grave just like everyone else, right? Obviously, there's some exceptions, but there's also exceptions for everyone else too. And so what these people are describing is something that's happening at a time where people lived in a completely different reality than what we live in today, right? They're making their predictions based on how they understood their world at that time, right? They couldn't see 15, 16, 1700 years into the future to understand that our current reality is some place where this behavior would be unacceptable, right? So today, I would say this applies to no one, right? No one to any significant degree. And most certainly not black Americans, right? So let's keep going to verse 27. Verse 27, the Lord shall smite thee with the botch of Egypt, and with the emrods, and with the scab, and with the itch, whereof thou canst not be healed. Again, this is going into the no one category. I don't know of any black Americans or anyone else to any significant degree that has scabs and itches that cannot be healed, right? What group do you know walking around with scabs and itches that cannot be healed, right? You would have to interpret this to mean some type of STD or something, right? But this verse here is another general verse, and it's not giving a hint that these people are envisioning some type of sexual disease, right? So I would say no one, this applies to no one to any significant degree, right? Let's keep going to verse 28. The Lord shall smite thee with madness and blindness and astonishment of heart, right? Multiple people around the world. Black Americans aren't the only ones that are mad and blind, right? What makes black Americans unique is that they're mad and blind in the most prosperous, educated, and technologically advanced country in the world. That's what people are confused about, right? There are plenty of people that live in countries and places with worse living conditions, right? And they have much less opportunity. So in a sense, they have a good reason to be mad and to be blind. But the Negro in America, they're in a position where the madness and the blindness today is something that's self-inflicted and self-sustained, right? So I'll categorize this as multiple people, right? Let's continue going. Verse 29, and thou shalt grope at noonday as the blind gropeth in darkness, and thou shalt not prosper in thy ways, and thou shalt be only oppressed and spoiled evermore, and no man shall save thee. And so this can apply to multiple people in just about any country throughout the world, right? Where they have people who can relate to this verse and could apply it to their own lives, right? And so you really have to step back out of the bubble, and you have to realize that there's a lot of people that have it much worse, right? To the point where black Americans complaining the way that they do today is almost like a spit in the face to a lot of people, because they really have hard times. A lot of people out there, right? And they have close to no opportunities to do much about the circumstances that they're in, right? But that's not the case for Black Americans. Next verse, verse 30. Thou shalt betroth a wife, and another man shall lie with her. Thou shalt build an house, and thou shalt not dwell therein. Thou shalt plant a vineyard, and shalt not gather the grapes thereof. Now, where is this happening today in Black America, where someone is taking a wife and another person lays with her, right? This is talking about another man forcing themselves on her. Where is this happening at any significant rate in the Black community? It's not, right? It may happen sometimes, right? But it also happens sometimes in other communities in America, right? And also throughout the world. So I don't see anything in this part of the verse that is exclusive to Black Americans or descendants of slaves, right? This could happen to anyone, and this does. And what about building houses? Black Americans barely build any houses to begin with. The white and the Mexicans do most of the construction in America. And the Black Americans, just like everyone else, buy from them, right? So this curse doesn't even make sense to apply this to Black Americans in today's time, right? And what is even less applicable is the last part in the verse where it's talking about planting a vineyard, right? Most Black Americans have no interest in planting vineyards, right? And neither do most other Americans, right? Which is why most Americans don't plant them. And so if Americans want grapes, then they just go right up the street to any major grocery store and they buy them from there. So I can see this curse right here applying to no one today because it doesn't really make sense. Let's continue to verse 31. Thine ox shall be slain before thine eyes, and thou shalt not eat thereof. Thine ass shall be violently taken away before thy face, and shall not be restored to thee. Thy sheep shall be given unto thine enemies, and thou shalt have none to rescue them. Most Black Americans don't want anything to do with raising sheep, right? It would almost be a curse for them to have to raise the sheep and to raise the cattle, right? This has applications to groups living in many rural areas in India, Africa, Southeast Asia, and so forth, right? Where they still live a life where cattle is very much part of their livelihood, right? And so this curse is more relatable to them than the average Black American or the average descendant of a slave, however you want to put it, right? And so I'll categorize this as applying to multiple people, but it's really referring to the rural area types of people, right? Not the inner city ghetto, a typical type of Black person, right? Verse 32, let's keep going. Thy sons and thy daughters shall be given unto another people, and thine eyes shall look and fail with longing for them all the day long, and there shall be no might in thy hand. Now, who is this happening to today? Right? There's an estimated 50 million people today who are caught in the modern day slavery, because slavery still exists, right? It still exists in the illegal underground world, right? Within the Black market, right? And none of these 50 million people have anything to do with Black Americans, as we can see right here on this particular map, right? We can see the areas here with the richer colors. These are the most prevalent areas for peoples whose sons and daughters are being given unto another people, right? Parts of Africa, parts of Asia, parts of the Middle East, parts of Europe, right? Even parts of Central and South America, right? Do we see the sons and the daughters given unto another people, right? But nowhere in America, because the Black Americans, they have it good, right? But they just haven't recognized it, right? Because many of them, they're trapped in their own small circle of thinking that the only world that exists is the one that they live in, right? And that's just not true. And so today, this verse would apply to multiple people with the exclusion of Black Americans, right? And so this happened to Black Americans over 150 years ago. But if we go back into history, it also happened to the majority of the world at some point, right? When slavery was an accepted norm for the ancient societies. Let's keep moving to verse 33. The fruit of thy land and all thy labors shall a nation which thou knowest not eat up, and thou shalt be only oppressed and crushed always. Now, who is this happening to today? For sure not Black Americans, because they don't live in a society that relies on producing fruit off of their own land to survive, right? That's not the world that they live in today. The world that they live in today is where large farms labor to produce the fruits off of their land, and then everyone else eats up the fruits that they have produced, right? That's one thing. Now, are Black Americans oppressed today? Not by other people, but most of their ancestors did experience real oppression by other people, right? And they fought hard to relieve the oppression off their backs and off of their descendants' backs, right? With hope of them carrying on the torch and then moving forward, right? So how are they oppressed today? By their own mind and the thoughts that they think, right? Slaves to their own mind, and they can't see freedom even if it was right in front of them, right? Many of the millennials and the Gen Zs, they're still wandering around America acting as if they're still in the civil rights era or the Jim Crow South, right? Acting as if they have no power to change the circumstances of their own lives, right? Slaves to their own mind, right? But who else is oppressed? Many people throughout the world, right? If you want to know what oppression looks like, then look at North Korea, where the people have no access to internet and they're also not allowed to leave the country, right? They operate under a dictator who controls the country's media and limits the way that they can perceive their reality, right? And so a lot of them, they have no clue about the world that's beyond the borders of North Korea because they can't use things like YouTube and Facebook, right? The things that Westerners take for granted.
People in North Korea, they don't even know that they are oppressed. They don't have the word to describe what oppression is. So if you don't know you're a slave, how do you fight to be free? And that is the thing in North Korea. People don't know they are living under the dictatorship. They don't know that they have rights as human beings. And we don't even have internet. Have you ever seen the picture of North Korea at nighttime? Like it's the darkest place in the world.
Yeah.
So we don't even know that outside the world like this exists.
Yeah.
And that's why there has been no revolution over the last 80 years.
And so Eritrea in East Africa, this is another place where people are restricted to access of internet and also restricted to leaving. And so a lot of them, they're trying to figure out how they can get out of that country, which some of them call a prison, right? This is what oppression looks like. Most Black Americans live in a paradise compared to what these people are going through and how these people and other people are oppressed throughout the world, right? And so the voice of Black Americans today wouldn't even be worth listening to in a conversation with those of other oppressed people in other countries with what they have going on in their circumstances, right? And so this verse here, I would put this in the others category, right? Let's keep going to verse 34. So that thou shalt be mad for the sight of thine eyes, which thou shalt see. Multiple people around the world, they can relate to this verse or find some way to apply it. Verse 35. The Lord shall smite thee in the knees and in the legs with a sore botch that cannot be healed from the sole of thy foot up to the top of thy head. This is applying to no one, right? I don't see any specific group of people today who are smitten in the knees and the legs all the way up to the head with swords that cannot be healed. What group of people can you point to and say, that's them? You would have to make this verse mean something other than what it literally means, right? And you would have to show how this verse applies to the descendants of the transatlantic slave trade. And I'm sure you'd have to do a lot of reaching to make this work, right? So we're going to place this in the category of no one. Verse 36, the Lord shall bring thee and thy king, which thou shalt set over thee, unto a nation which neither thou nor thy fathers have known. And there shalt thou serve other gods, wood and stone. Who is this happening to today? Whose people, along with their king, is being brought to another nation to serve other gods today? No one today, right? At least to my knowledge, no one. This is not happening to anyone. But who has this happened to in the past? Multiple people from different backgrounds, right? This was more relevant centuries ago when slavery was happening and was a normal part of society in the world, right? But this curse doesn't hardly make any sense today to pinpoint who the Israelites are, right? You're going to be hard to make this verse right here apply to anyone specifically and say their king is taken and brought to another land. And it's most definitely not going to happen to Black Americans, right? That's not happening to them. This would probably be someone in the Middle East somewhere or like different parts of Africa or maybe some parts of Asia, right? Definitely not the Black Americans, right? This is not happening to them, right? They got it good. Believe me. Verse 37, and thou shalt become an astonishment, a proverb, a byword among all nations, whether the Lord shall lead thee, right? This verse right here is so general that multiple people could make a case for this applying to them, right? People from Mexico, people from Iran, people from Pakistan, people from Iraq, people from China, people from India, people from East Africa, right? The Aboriginals in Australia. I mean, the list goes on and on of people who feel that they are mistreated when they go to other places, right? It's just that most people They're only zoomed in into their own plights, right? So they can't see what's happening and what other people go through as well, right? Let's keep moving on. Verse 38. Thou shalt carry much seed out into the field, and shalt gather but little in, for the locust shall consume it. Black Americans live in North America, where locusts are not much of any concern for farmers, right? There hasn't been any major locust outbreak since 1875. And black people have definitely been growing crops since that time, right? But no locusts have been tearing their stuff up, right? The last major locust swarm, it happened in from 2019 to 2022. And it happened in the Horn of Africa over there with Ethiopia and Kenya, around that area, right? And also in the Arabian Peninsula. So this curse would apply to them if it applied to anyone at all. So I would categorize this under the other category. Verse 39, let's keep going. Thou shalt plant vineyards and dress them, but shalt neither drink of the wine nor gather the grapes, for the worms shall eat them. Right? Other category. This applies to farmers who are having a hard time controlling pests. This has nothing to do with most black Americans who can care less about growing grapes and gathering the harvest. Verse 40, let's keep going. Thou shalt have olive trees throughout all thy coast, but thou shalt not anoint thyself with the oil, for thine oil shall cast his fruit. This is going into the others category, right? These are farmers who mostly grow olive trees today, right? This has nothing to do with a black person living in the inner city Chicago today, right? Let's keep going. Verse 41. Thou shalt beget sons and daughters, but thou shalt not enjoy them, for they shall go into captivity. This is going into the others category, right? This would apply to people living in countries where they are still capturing and selling people in the black market as slaves, right? This has nothing to do with a black America who sits comfortably in America in a country that no longer enslaves people, right? And so again, this curse would have hit if it was, we're talking about 150 years ago when chattel slavery was still happening here. But this curse is irrelevant to black Americans who enjoy physical freedom today, right? Try telling this to the parents of people who have actually had their sons and daughters taken today and sold into captivity, right? Tell that to them today, that this curse belongs to or applies to black Americans who are sitting comfortably over there in America, right? And see what type of reaction you get out of them, right? This has nothing to do with black Americans today. Verse 42, all the trees and the fruit of thy land shall the locust consume. This is going into the other category. Nothing to do with the inner city black person over there in Detroit or in New York or in Los Angeles or in Las Vegas, right? Nothing to do with them. Verse 43, the stranger that is within thee shall get up above thee very high, and thou shalt come down very low. All people in the pit of society from every country around the world could find some way to relate this to them due to their circumstances, right? So this goes under the multiple people. I can't just say that this is just for black Americans or the descendants of slaves, right? There's a whole bigger world out there where people are having problems, and a lot of problems. Verse 44, he shall lend to thee, and thou shalt not lend to him. He shall be the head, and thou shalt be the tail. Multiple people that are in the pits of society, right? Whether it's in India, the Philippines, Romania, Bulgaria, Brazil, Africa, and even here in black America. You can apply this to the black Americans too, right? But all these places have people that are in the pit that are the tail, and they have heads that are above them that lend to them, right? The story is similar all over the world, right? Verse 45, moreover, all these curses shall come upon thee, and shall pursue thee, and overtake thee, till thou be destroyed, because thou hearkenest not unto the voice of the Lord thy God, to keep his commandments and his statutes which he commanded thee. So it says all these curses, right? Not some of them, not one of them here or there, not one or two, but all these curses shall come upon the people and destroy them, right? And I can't name a people in the world that has all these curses on them, right? As far as we've gone so far. And so watch the next verse right here, because it's going to put the nail all the way in the coffin. Verse 46, and they shall be upon thee for a sign and for a wonder, and upon thy seed forever. This is exactly what the gentleman was talking about when he wrote the comment. These should be a sign, and they should be on the children of Israel forever. Understand? So if this were true, and it were really from some divine being, and not from the imagination of some of these ancient priests, then we should see all these curses upon thy seed forever, right? And that's the reason why I fixated on who is experiencing these curses today, right now, right? I already know how people try to do it, right? They'll pick slavery from the 1600s that's fulfilling one part, right? Then they'll slide on over and pick something that happened 100 years ago to fulfill another part, right? Then they'll slide over and they'll pick something that's happening from today to fulfill another part, right? And that's how they'll try to make these curses work. But if you stick to thus saith the Lord, then you can clearly see that it says that these curses shall be for a sign upon thy seed forever, right? And forever includes today. And I'm having a very hard time making these curses fit exclusively to one group of people today, right? And anyone else, they'll have a hard time as well if they look at these curses and look at what they're saying and compare it to what's actually happening today. Let's keep it moving. Verse 47. Because thou servest not the Lord thy God with joyfulness and with gladness of heart for the abundance of all things, therefore shalt thou serve thine enemies, which the Lord shall send against thee, in hunger and in thirst and in nakedness and in want of all things. And he shall put a yoke of iron upon thy neck until he have destroyed thee, right? Here's one of the verses that we can say that applied to some of the ancestors of the Black Americans, right? Over 150 years ago, where they did place iron yokes around some of the slaves' necks for punishment, right? But this also happened in the past to various European ethnic groups who were enslaved by the Romans, right?
This is a Roman slave collar from around 500 AD. So these fit quite snugly around the neck. They were about the size of the collar of like a small or medium dress shirt, modern dress shirt. They became widespread after the Emperor Constantine banned either tattooing or branding of slaves. The captions on the collars generally read something like, "I've run away, capture me and send me back to my owner, which is here." And sometimes there's a reward, and probably more often there's not. This does indicate some sense of community within Roman society, as, you know, if there wasn't a reward for returning a slave, then there wasn't really an incentive to do so, but they still did it.
Onto the platform. I had to stand there. People poking me, prodding me. I had a sign around my neck. On it were strange scribbles. Didn't understand what they meant. My feet were whitened with chalk. This shoe that I was a new slave. Me, I was bought by Elenister, who I was told was the owner of a gladiator school. He decided that he wanted me to work in his kitchens. He needed someone who was a bit strong for hard manual labour. He fitted this strange metal collar around my neck. It had strange writing on it that people were looking at. I couldn't take it off.
Verse 49. The Lord shall bring a nation against thee from far, from the end of the earth, as swift as the eagle flieth, a nation whose tongue thou shalt not understand. This could be applied to multiple people around the world, those who fell victim to the European conquest from the 1400s onward, right? The Indians in the country India, they didn't understand the tongue of the Europeans. The Australian Aborigines, they didn't understand the tongue of the Europeans. The Native Americans, they didn't understand the tongue of the Europeans. The West Africans who were caught, they didn't understand the tongue of the Europeans, nor did they understand the tongue of the other West Africans who caught them and sold them as slaves to the European partners, right? The Filipinos, they didn't understand the tongue of the Europeans, right? And so forth. All these people didn't understand the tongue of the European conquerors who came. So this verse right here, it can apply to multiple people. Let's keep it moving. Verse 50. A nation of fierce countenance, which shall not regard the person of the old, nor show favor to the young. And he shall eat the fruit of thy cattle and the fruit of thy land, and thou shalt be destroyed, which also shall not leave thee either corn, wine, or oil, or the increase of thy kind, or flocks of thy sheep, until he have destroyed thee. This is relatable to people who live in rural areas and who still herd flocks and cattle, right? This is completely irrelevant to a city-dwelling black person who lives in America. And this is one of the reasons why these verses never get used in the Deuteronomy 28 DNA test. And so this right here is going to go in the other category. Verse 52. And he shall besiege thee in all thy gates, until thy high and fenced walls come down, wherein thou trustedst throughout all thy land. And he shall besiege thee in all thy gates throughout all thy land, which the Lord God hath given thee. Right? This doesn't sound like a place in America. This sounds like it's referring to the land of Israel, because that's the land that was supposed to be given to them. Right? That's the place with the high walls that were set up at that time for protection. Right? America doesn't place high walls around the country to protect it, other than on the Mexican border. Right? Some places on the Mexican border. And black Americans, they don't live in that area, right? And at any significant number. And so these writers, they're making curses based off of the world that they knew at that time, which is not the same world that we live in today. Verse 53, and thou shalt eat the fruit of thine own body, the flesh of thy sons and thy daughters, which the Lord God hath given thee, in the siege and in the straitness, wherewith thine enemies shall distress thee. Now, where is this happening at today, and to who? Remember, the curses are supposed to be for a sign on thy seed forever. So that means we should see this curse on someone today if this were from a divine being, as it says, right? And so who is cannibalizing themselves and their children today from being ran out of a city, right? I would say no one, at least to my knowledge, right? Maybe a few desperate people from some other places on earth, but that's about it, right? It's not happening in any substantial number to where we can point to these people and say, this is who it's happening to, such and such group, and therefore these are the signs of them being the Israelites, right? This is not the case. Verse 54, so that the man that is tender among you and very delicate, his eye shall be evil towards his brother, and toward the wife of his bosom, and toward the remnant of his children, which he shall leave, right? Let's keep it going and keep it in context to find out why he's going to leave. Watch this. Verse 55, so that he will not give to any of them the flesh of his children, whom he shall eat, because he hath nothing left in the siege and in the straitness, wherein thine enemies shall distress thee in all thy gates. This is talking about a man who is desperate and starving to the point where he's leaving because he doesn't want to share any of the flesh from his children that he's going to be eating, right? This isn't talking about black fathers leaving their children because they don't want to be a responsible parent or because they went to prison, right? And so which people are in such desperate situation to where they need to run off so they can avoid sharing their children that they're going to eat? No one. Let's keep it moving. Verse 56. The tender and delicate woman among you, which would not adventure to set the sole of her foot upon the ground for delicateness and tenderness, her eye shall be evil toward the husband of her bosom, and toward her son, and toward her daughter. Now watch this. Let's keep it in context and find out why she turned this way. Watch this. Verse 57. And from her young one that cometh out from between her feet, and toward her children which she shall bear. For she shall eat them for want of all things secretly in the siege and the straitness, wherewith thine enemies shall distress thee in thy gates. She's trying to eat the flesh of her children too, just like the husband was trying to run off and eat the flesh of his children, right? This is talking about an enemy nation coming to take them down and cutting off all of the supplies to the city and basically starving them out to get them to surrender, right? That's essentially what a siege is. And so this has absolutely nothing to do with a black person who's in the pit here in America, right? He has a completely different problem than what these curses are talking about, right? So I would say that this applies to the no one category, at least to the extent that it's described right here in this verse. Let's go to verse 58. If thou wilt not observe to do all the words of this law that are written in this book, that thou mayest fear the glorious and fearful name, the Lord thy God, then the Lord will make thy plagues wonderful, and the plagues of thy seed, even great plagues, and of long continuance, and of sore sickness, and of long continuance. Moreover, he will bring upon thee all the diseases of Egypt, which thou wast afraid of, and they shall cleave unto thee. Also every sickness and every plague, which is not written in the book of this law, them the Lord will bring upon thee until thou be destroyed. This is another vague and broad verse, right? This is a catch-all verse. So just in case the people didn't follow the law, then anything bad that happened to them, they would automatically link this to being a curse from God, right? That they weren't following what they were supposed to do, right? This is how the writers of these texts played the game to control their society, right? They were master mind manipulators, And they used a very powerful tool to do this. And it worked for a very long time, but not today. Verse 62, and ye shall be left few in numbers, whereas you were as the stars of heaven for multitude, because thou wouldest not obey the voice of the Lord thy God. If anything, this would apply to the Jews of European descent, right? They're the ones that are few in number compared to everyone else, right? But this can't possibly be applied to a black American, right? Or any of the descendants of slaves, right? It just can't. It doesn't make any sense. Verse 63, and it shall come to pass that as the Lord rejoice over you to do you good and multiply you, so the Lord will rejoice over you to destroy you and to bring you to naught. And ye shall be plucked from off the land whither thou goest to possess it. And the Lord shall scatter thee among all people from one end of the earth even unto the other. And there thou shalt serve other gods, which neither thou nor thy fathers have known, even wood and stone. And so understand that no group of people is scattered amongst all people. People try to use the transatlantic slave trade to say that the West Africans were scattered amongst all people, and that's not true. The vast majority of the captives, like we talked about earlier, they went to South America, the Caribbean islands, and a small percentage went to North America and to places like Britain, right? That's not representative of all people. That's not even half of the people on the planet, right? And it's not from one end of the earth to the other. That's just the Western Hemisphere. But there are many places where the West Africans didn't get scattered into, right? Places like Iceland, much of the parts of the continent of Asia, right? Like places that you see all in this area here, places like Mongolia, Tajikistan, and most definitely you won't find people from West African slave ancestry in places like North Korea, right? So they're not scattered amongst all people from one end of the earth all the way to the other, right? And neither is anyone else. And on top of that, this verse talks about serving other gods, which neither them nor their fathers have known, right? This could refer to just about anyone who was conquered by the European colonizers, right? From people in Asia to people in different parts of Africa to people that were in the Americas, because none of these people nor their ancestors knew about the Jesus that the colonizers brought and had them worshiping, right? So this verse right here is not pinpointing anyone specifically, right? No group is scattered amongst all people from one end of the earth all the way to another. And there are many different people all the way throughout the world who are serving gods that neither them nor their ancestors had known, right? So you'd have to stretch the meaning of this verse to make it fit any one particular group, right? So I'm going to put this in the no one category. Let's keep it going. Verse 65. And amongst these nations thou shalt find no ease, and neither shall the sole of thy foot have rest. But the Lord shall give thee there a trembling heart, and failing of eyes, and sorrow of mind. This is talking about no one, because we already established that no group has been scattered amongst all nations for this to even be talking about, right? North Korea is a country that's on lockdown and has been on lockdown for some time. And there are no West African slave descendants that live there, right? Other than the North Koreans themselves, there's only a small ethnic minority of Chinese and Japanese people that live there, and maybe a few other small groups from the Asian continent. But the people who wrote this prophecy, they obviously didn't know that this would be the case. So let's continue on to verse 66. And thy life should hang in doubt before thee, and thou shalt fear day and night, and shalt have none assurance of thy life. If this is still talking about being scattered amongst all people, which I think it is, then this is in the no one category as well. Now, if you interpret this as being just in general about life itself, then multiple people from around the world could say that this verse here relates to them, right? So I'm going to put this in the no one category. Verse 67. In the morning thou shalt say, would God it were even, and at even thou shalt say, would God it were morning. For the fear of thine heart wherewith thou shalt fear, and for the sight of thine eyes which thou shalt see. Same thing. This could either be no one or multiple people, depending on how this is interpreted, right? This vague verse right here. But I'll put it in the no one category because I believe this is still referring to the scattered that are supposed to be amongst all people, which no one in the world fits today, right? And so let's continue going into verse 68. And the Lord shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships. By the way whereof I spake unto thee, thou shalt see it no more again. And there ye shall be sold unto your enemies, for bondmen and bondwomen, and no man shall buy you. Now, this is the verse right here that a lot of people use to show the transatlantic slave trade. And this is the verse right here that caught me in the trap when I first heard about the knowledge, right? This is the one that sealed the deal, right? It just made sense. And this is the verse right here that trapped a lot of other people into thinking in a certain way as well. But we're going to go through this verse right now, and we're going to go through it slowly, right? And one thing I want to do is, before we go over it, I want us to be clear that up to this point, we have kept all the other verses that we have went through in their literal interpretation, right? We haven't made anything metaphoric. Everything has been literal up to this point. The yokes of iron, we kept as literal. The vineyards and the grapes, we kept as literal. The children being sold into captivity, we interpreted those as being literal, right? Because there was no reason for us to interpret these verses otherwise. So now at verse 68, we're going to follow the same pattern and interpret it as it is written, right? Because we want to see if this applies to anyone at all today. And so the Lord shall bring thee into Egypt again. The story says that the children of Israel left the actual country of Egypt, not a metaphoric Egypt, but the actual country located in Africa, right? So this verse is saying that they would go there again. And how would they go to this same literal Egypt? With ships. Is it possible to go from Israel to Egypt with ships? Of course it is. You can look right here on the map. All they have to do is get loaded right here on the coast of Israel and then sail just a little ways right over here to Egypt, right? This is an easy trip to make, and it's something that the writers would have easily known in their world at that time, right? This is not something that they had to do a great prophecy about, right? It made sense. And so it says, by the way whereof I spake unto thee, thou shalt see it no more again, meaning that they were told that they would never go there again. And when they arrived to this literal Egypt again, what would happen? They would be sold to the Egyptian enemies as slaves. But what would happen? No one would buy them. And so one thing that you have to understand right now is that the King James Version is not the most accurate translation of the text. You have to remove the religious mind for a second and just do some basic scholarship. Go into the world of biblical scholarship and you'll find out that that is just a common thing. People know that the KJV is not the most accurate translation. They didn't have the best text to work from.
What were those translators actually translating? Every modern translation of the Hebrew Bible is based on a single manuscript. It is the oldest complete text of the Hebrew Bible that we have in the world, and it is from the 11th century CE. So like not BCE, like the recent 11th century, like less than 1,000 years ago. Or to put it another way, around 2,000 years after the earliest biblical texts were probably composed. So your Bible, your text that your Bible is based on, the Hebrew that your translation is based on, is from the 11th century, 2,000 years after some of the biblical texts were written. And the question is, what do we think the chances are that that text remained perfectly stable for those 2,000 years between it first being written and our manuscript? Again, the best biblical text we have is from the Middle Ages. We have really very little way of accessing what the original authors of these texts might have wanted us to read. Another layer of difficulty, that one manuscript that all of our modern translations are based on, like every manuscript out there, has typos. Right? I mean, you imagine having to hand copy the entirety of the Bible. It's a mistake here and there. Many modern translations are aware of these mistakes. We compare that manuscript to other ones, and we figure out where something's gone wrong, perhaps. So modern translations often are aware of these and will correct these errors, often without letting you know that they're doing so. Other translations, like the King James, famously, doesn't fix those errors.
Right, and so the NIV, which is a much more accurate translation, it translates this verse more accurate and more comprehensible, right? And so it says this. It says, there you will offer yourself for sale to your enemies as male and female slaves, but no man will buy you, right? The ESV, or the English Standard Version, it says that, and there you will offer yourself to be sold, and no one will buy you, right? These translations, they are more accurate and they make more sense than the King James Version, which says that you will be sold and no one will buy you, because you can't be sold and not bought at the same time. That doesn't make any sense, right? That's a contradiction. And that's why they cleared it up in the newer translations, right? With the more accurate scripts that they use. And so this verse right here applies to no one today. No one can say that this happened to them, and no one can say that this is happening to them today. I don't see any of these curses applying exclusively to Black Americans, or being able to be used to pinpoint Black Americans as having all these curses that are talked about in Deuteronomy 28. It just doesn't apply, and it doesn't add up when you're looking at it with open eyes, right? Talking about vineyards and gathering grapes and planting olive trees, eating children, right? All these things don't apply, right? They have completely different problems than what we just went over in Deuteronomy 28, right? And one of the problems that they have is their thinking pattern, and thinking that they can use Deuteronomy 28 or the Bible as a more accurate and reliable replacement for a DNA test, right? This is hustling backwards, right? And it's this type of thinking that keeps people in the pit, right? This is hustling in reverse. This is what people like myself had to learn to get away from, right? And so I encourage many of you to go through this, make up some categories like I did, right? Come up with your own categories and just do an honest assessment of Deuteronomy 28 and see what you find. And many of you, you're going to have a different interpretation than what I just had, right? Which just further proves the point on why using the Bible isn't anywhere close to being as reliable as just using a simple DNA test with the technology that we have today to find out where your ancestors come from, right? Because if you rely on the Bible, you're going to have a different interpretation. The person next to you is going to have one. The one across the room, the one across town, the one across the country, and the one living on Mars. All going to have different interpretations, right? And so hopefully this has helped someone grab on the ladder, on the rung, to climb one more rung up that ladder out of the pit to get into the free world where life is much better and it makes more sense. And so I want to thank you for watching all the way into the end. My name is Brooklyn St. Michael, and I'll see you in the free world.